How to break the avoidant after loving one without lifting a finger. Let's talk about that moment after you've poured your heart into someone who couldn't even meet you halfway. The one who ran every time you got close. The avoidant. You didn't just love them, you showed up, gave your best, stayed loyal, waited for growth that never came. And now you're left wondering, how do I move on from this? Better yet, how do I shift the power without chasing, begging, or lifting a single finger? Let me tell you something that will change the way you look at all of this. You don't break the avoidant by trying harder. You break the avoidant by becoming unavailable to inconsistency. You see, people who avoid intimacy thrive on control. They love the upper hand, the space you give them when you're anxious and they pull away. They feed off your overfunctioning. But the minute you stop playing that game, the rules change. You don't have to send a dramatic text. You don't need to show them what they lost. You just need to walk in the energy of someone who finally gets it, someone who understands their worth and makes peace with not being chosen by someone who never fully showed up. And ironically, that's the energy that turns tables. Because the avoidant expects you to chase. They expect you to break. But when you don't, when you smile, breathe, and raise your standards, that silence hits louder than any words. Remember this, you weren't too much, they were too little. And now, you're not breaking them to win. You're breaking free to begin. When you've loved someone with an avoidant attachment style, your natural instinct might have been to do more, to prove yourself, to show that you were safe, loyal, patient, and understanding. You tried to be everything they needed, hoping that if you just loved them harder, they'd finally feel secure enough to choose you fully. But here's the truth, no one tells you in the beginning. The more you give to an avoidant partner without healthy boundaries in place, the more they pull away. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because they're operating from a place of fear, not love. And when someone fears intimacy, your effort can feel suffocating, even if it comes from a beautiful place. Overgiving isn't love. It's self-abandonment disguised devotion. It's bending yourself into emotional origami to make someone else feel whole, even when they're not offering the same energy in return. It's a dance where only one person is moving, hoping that eventually the other will join in. But in reality, the more you over-reinforce a toxic dynamic where their avoidance is rewarded and your needs are sidelined, you might think, if I stop trying, it'll fall apart. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If your effort is the only thing holding the connection together, it's already broken. A healthy relationship doesn't require one person to carry all the emotional weight. If someone withdraws the moment you express a need, they're not protecting their peace, they're avoiding intimacy. And your constant giving only teaches them that they can show up half-heartedly and still be loved fully. That's not partnership, that's a performance. Pulling back your energy isn't manipulation, it's correction. It's realigning with the truth that your love is a gift, not a bribe. You need to earn affection through sacrifice. And the moment you stop overgiving is the moment the dynamic begins to shift, not because you're punishing them, but because you're finally showing up for yourself. You're no longer feeding a connection that only drains you. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to stop. Stop explaining yourself. Stop proving your worth. Stop adjusting your needs to accommodate someone else's comfort zone. The people who are ready will rise to meet you, and the ones who aren't, let them reveal themselves. But don't confuse your silence for indifference as strength. It's the quiet revolution of choosing peace over performance. When you stop overgiving, you create space. And in that space, the avoidant either confronts their patterns or confirms their limits. Either way, you win, because love shouldn't be something you have to beg for, barter for, or bleed for. The right connection doesn't require you to shrink. It invites you to expand. And that expansion begins the moment you decide your love deserves a home, not a hiding place. Being unavailable to inconsistency isn't about playing games or pretending to be cold. It's about raising the standard for how you allow people to show up in your life. When someone with an avoidant attachment style keeps pulling away, going hot and cold, and creating emotional whiplash, it can be tempting to make excuses for their behavior. You tell yourself they just need time, they've been hurt, they're not used to love like yours. And maybe all of that is true. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, how much inconsistency am I willing to accept before I start betraying myself? We often think love means waiting for someone to catch up. We think patience will prove our value. But inconsistency isn't just inconvenient, it's emotional instability. When someone is consistent, you feel safe. You don't question where you stand. You don't live in the anxious gap between, are we okay today? And will they disappear tomorrow? That's not love. That's survival mode. And you weren't built to survive someone, you were built to thrive in partnership with someone who chooses you every single day. When you become unavailable to inconsistency, you stop rationalizing behavior that confuses your nervous system. You stop accepting breadcrumbs in hopes they'll turn into a meal. You no longer get excited when they suddenly show affection after being distant, because you know that real connection isn't based on unpredictable spikes of attention. It's built on the quiet, boring beauty of someone showing up even when it's inconvenient, even when things aren't perfect, even when they don't feel in control. Avoidants often test your boundaries not maliciously, but because they're operating from fear. They push away when things get too close, then return when they feel you slipping. If you keep letting them back in without requiring consistency, you become a comfort zone for them, not a partner. And slowly, you start to dim your own needs just to keep the connection alive. But when you make inconsistency a deal breaker, everything changes. You don't have to yell, beg, or argue. You just start responding differently. You stop emotionally investing in words that aren't backed by action. You create space not to punish, but to protect. You stop initiating conversations, plans, or affection when they've shown they can't hold that space responsibly. And most of all, you stop explaining why they need to be better. Because if they cared enough to keep you, they'd already be trying. Being unavailable to inconsistency isn't about closing your heart. It's about protecting it. It's about knowing that love without stability is chaos, and you deserve more than fragments of someone who can't decide if they want to stay. You don't have to settle for emotional turbulence just because the highs are intoxicating. You get to choose peace. And peace often begins the moment you stop romanticizing potential and start respecting your own boundaries more than their excuses. Shifting the energy after loving someone with an avoidant attachment style is not about strategy or manipulation. It's about reclaiming your emotional power. When you're involved with someone who fears intimacy, the dynamic often becomes lopsided. You feel like you're doing the emotional heavy lifting while they remain distant, guarded, and detached. Over time, this creates a silent imbalance where your self-worth becomes entangled in their approval. You begin to measure your value by how much they open up, how much they let you in. You start tiptoeing around their emotional walls, thinking if you say the right thing or love them the right way, they'll finally choose you fully. But real connection can't be forced. It can't be earned through sacrifice. The more you chase, the more you reinforce the idea that they hold the power, and that's the energy that needs to shift. You shift the energy the moment you stop trying to fix them or prove yourself to them. You shift it by stepping back, not out of resentment, but out of realization you can't carry a relationship alone. You can't love someone into security if they refuse to meet you halfway. Changing your energy means detaching from the outcome. Not because you don't care, but because you've realized that loving someone doesn't mean waiting indefinitely for them to catch up. It means honoring your own needs, even if they can't meet them. When you detach with grace, you send a powerful message not to them, but to yourself. I'm no longer investing in uncertainty. I choose clarity. This shift in energy isn't loud. It's not about cutting them off dramatically or making declarations. It's in the small, subtle decisions you make, not reaching out when they go silent. Not over-explaining your boundaries, not reacting emotionally when they pull away again. You respond with calm, you hold your ground, you protect your peace. When the energy shifts, they feel it. And here's the irony: when you stop chasing, the avoidant often becomes curious. Not because you've manipulated them, but because you're no longer playing the role they're used to. They expect you to overextend, to prove, to wait. But when you do none of that, when your energy becomes centered instead of anxious, they're forced to confront themselves. But the point of this shift isn't to get a reaction, it's to get you back. When you stop pouring your energy into someone who can't hold it, you start pouring it into your healing, your peace, your clarity. That's the energy of self-respect. That's what makes you magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you finally stop seeking validation outside of yourself. The shift happens when you stop making their avoidance about your inadequacy and start seeing it for what it is, or in what it is, a reflection of their fear, not your failure. When your energy changes, your story changes. You're no longer the one waiting to be chosen. You're the one who knows their worth and walks accordingly. Letting silence speak is one of the most powerful things you can do after loving someone who constantly pulled away. When you're used to giving, explaining, fixing, and chasing clarity, silence feels unnatural, almost painful. You're conditioned to think that if you don't say something, you'll lose your chance to be understood, or worse, you'll lose them completely. But here's the truth: silence isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the space where self-worth breathes and chaos loses its grip. It's what happens when you stop engaging in a cycle that's never brought you peace, only temporary relief followed by more confusion. When you're dealing with an avoidant partner, there's often a pattern: they pull back, you react. You send the "what's going on" text. You try to soothe them, reassure them, or remind them that you're not going anywhere. And while your intention is love, your actions send another message: it's okay that you disappear. I'll always be here waiting. Over time, your voice becomes a response to their silence, and the dynamic becomes emotionally exhausting. You start to feel invisible, unheard, and deeply unsettled, but you keep speaking, hoping they'll finally respond in the way you need. But what happens when you stop filling the space, when you resist the urge to explain, defend, or ask for more? That silence becomes your boundary. It's not the cold shoulder, it's clarity. It's saying without saying, I will no longer invest my energy into one-sided conversations or connections. It creates a new reality, one where your value is not up for negotiation and your peace is no longer dependent on someone else's inconsistency. People often fear silence because they think it means they're losing. But silence is often when the real shift happens, not just for them, but for you. In silence, you stop managing their emotions and start honoring your own. You step out of the cycle of reaction and into the power of observation. You begin to see more clearly who they really are, not who you hoped they would be. And from that clarity, you make stronger choices, not emotionally driven ones, but self-respecting ones. Interestingly, silence is often the thing that unsettles avoidant individuals the most. They're used to distance giving them control. But when you go quiet, not out of anger, but out of resolve, they no longer know where they stand. That absence of reaction is louder than any confrontation. It forces them to sit with their own discomfort instead of distracting themselves with your efforts. Silence doesn't guarantee they'll come back changed, but it does guarantee that you'll come back stronger. Because it's in the silence that you find the part of yourself that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. The part of you that says, I've said all I needed to. Now I listen not to them, but to myself. And in that stillness, you realize something powerful your peace never needed to be out for. It just needed to be chosen. There comes a moment after loving someone who couldn't love you fully when you realize that your healing isn't about getting them to change, it's about getting yourself back. So often we focus on breaking the avoidant. We want them to see what they lost, to regret pushing us away, to wake up and suddenly become who we needed them to be. But that mindset keeps us trapped. It keeps us tied to their growth, their potential, their decisions. And the truth is, you don't break the avoidant by proving your worth to them. You break free by proving your worth to yourself. You were never meant to be the one who waited in emotional limbo, always hoping for scraps of affection, always holding your breath between their moments of connection and their disappearances. You were never supposed to confuse love with unpredictability or acceptance with endurance. But when you fall for someone avoidant, the lines get blurry. You start to believe that their inability to stay close is something you can fix. If only you love harder, stay longer, or become more understanding. That's the lie, the trap, the cycle. You don't need to become smaller to make someone feel safer. You don't need to dim your needs to avoid being too much. And you certainly don't need to sit in silence, waiting for someone to choose you once they've sorted things out for us. You are allowed to say, I want love that stays. And if they can't offer that, it's not your job to teach them how. It's your job to leave the door open for someone who already knows how to walk through it. Breaking free means letting go of the fantasy version of who they could become and dealing with the reality of who they are now. It means understanding that real love doesn't ask you to wait for someone to become emotionally available. Real love shows up now, not eventually. Real love builds with you, not around you, not in spite of you, not someday. Today. This shift isn't easy. It hurts because even though they may have been inconsistent or emotionally distant, you saw something in them, something worth loving. And maybe there was goodness in them, but it wasn't enough. Love alone isn't enough, not if it leaves you anxious, second-guessing yourself, and emotionally exhausted. You deserve more than almost. And so instead of breaking them, you break free. You stop centering your healing around their change. You stop waiting for closure and start creating your own. You walk, not because you don't care, but because you finally care enough about yourself. That's the true revolution, choosing your self-respect over their potential. You don't need revenge, erection, or recognition. You need peace. And peace doesn't come from fixing them. It comes from freeing yourself. Thank you for giving me the space to speak into your heart today. I hope this gave you a spark, a shift, a little more strength than you had before. Now go choose yourself in every room, every relationship, every moment. That's how you change the game without lifting a finger. Take care, stay powerful, and remember, love isn't something you wait for, it's something you rise to meet. Thank you, and goodbye.